So, how to have those tough conversations with parents. I have lots of resources for you tonight. We actually have a blog post over at Pre-K Pages on this very topic. So if you'd like to keep that in your reference files, pin it on Pinterest or whatever it is that you like to do, you're going to want to make sure that you go over there and read that if you're the kind of person who likes to have it in a format that you can read. And we have different types of learners, right? Auditory learners, visual learners, and that kind of thing. So if you want that if you want that blog post, you're going to want to go over there and check out the link that Tom is dropping in the comments below. Okay, I'm looking through. I printed this resource out to share with you, and I didn't realize it was like 15 pages long, so I'm sitting here going, where is it? Okay, so one of the things you're going to want to do when it comes to having those tough conversations. So let me just tell you where I come from with it, the whole thing. Beginning of the year, you let me know if this has ever happened to you. You have a child in your class, you meet the child for the first time, and all the bells and whistles in your head and the red flags are going off, and you're just like, oh my goodness, this child needs help, right? And you know it right away. And the reason you know it is because you're a professional and you've been doing this for a while, right? The longer you've been doing it, the easier it is for you to spot these types of things. So for you, the need is immediate. But think about the parent. Sometimes the parent hasn't brought it up to you. They haven't said anything. They might not be aware. You don't know how they feel about it. So now you've kind of got this whole unknown thing. Do I say anything? Do I not say anything? When do I say something? When's it appropriate to say something? How do I approach the topic? So over the years, as I became more and more experienced as a teacher, I came to realize that my bells and whistles and the red flags would go off way, way earlier than perhaps a parent or anybody else that wasn't a teacher, because I was so used to, and I knew child development, and I knew when kids hadn't reached a milestone or they were way behind in a milestone. I knew that. So the first thing you need to do is take a deep breath, because as teachers, we are so programmed to help and to teach that it really bothers us, and I know it really bothers me, when I know a child needs help and I can't get a child that help immediately. And so one thing we know about the system in the U.S. For referring children is that it's very, very slow and full of red tape. I don't know of anywhere in the United States where that happens quickly. So just accept what you cannot change, right? Just accept that and know that as long as you know and that you're thinking about it and it's in the forefront of your mind, that you will help the child and the parent go through that process if necessary. Now, the other thing I do want to talk about is that quite often the parent may not say anything to you because they want to see what you say first. They may not have had any other children before. This may be their first child. So their bells and whistles aren't going off, especially if their pediatrician hasn't noticed anything. So that parent might just have a slight inkling, maybe kind of a question in the back of their mind. So they're waiting for you to bring it up. Okay, so that's one scenario. And then other times, parents are in denial. We've all experienced that. If you've taught before, some parents don't want to acknowledge the fact that there might be a need. I've had some parents in the past tell me, well, it was their second child where there was a need. And the parents said, well, everybody told me not to compare my two children and that the two children would not be alike and that I couldn't compare one to the other. So when my second child started to show these signs, I had it in the forefront of my mind that I wasn't supposed to compare them and that they should be different. So I didn't think anything of it. So that sometimes happens too. There are many different scenarios that could happen, but sometimes the parent's in denial. Sometimes the parent has dismissed the need as being just a phase or something, and sometimes the parent is waiting for you to bring up the topic. So it could be any number of those things. So I think the most important thing to know, though, is if you have a child that you're thinking about right now that's sending off all those bells and whistles and red flags in your head, is that don't jump the gun. You don't want to say anything too soon because you don't really know the child yet. So I can say that the longer you've taught, the more you really know, but still you want to give the child a chance, okay? So Thank you. I'm just catching up on the comments. Andrea from Brazil, welcome. Great. Yes, Kimberly has a great point. That's why I like to read the comments. Sometimes y'all have such great things to say that they're even better than what I have to say. Kimberly says sometimes parents don't know because they don't know the milestones. Yes, and she talks about this with by giving handouts at open house and conferences with the milestones. Absolutely, absolutely. Good point, Kimberly. So now we've kind of established, you've got bells and whistles going off and why some parents might not have said anything or noticed anything. So how do you, let's say you give the child a chance. In my school district and in many school districts, they always say 6 weeks, 6 weeks, 6 weeks. Give the child 6 weeks of time. And the more seasoned you are, the more you know, well, things aren't going to change in 6 weeks, or, they might. But quite often, sometimes the needs are very great and it's quite obvious. So the minute you start seeing a need in a child, you can do something, whether it's something, you can't run to the principal, or you can't run to the diagnostician or run to the parent, but you can start taking notes. And that is going to really be helpful to you. We have some resources to share with you in the comments. There's one, it's a printable checklist written by Lindy McDaniels of Conscious Connections. Considerate Connections. Sorry, Lindy, if I got it wrong. She has a free printable that you can print out to record some of your observations with, because you're going to want to take some notes or data, as they call it. That's what they like to call it, right? So you're going to want to collect some notes on that child. Yes. So that's the first thing you're going to want to do. But just think about it like this. If a child has an academic need, it's very, very easy to show that parent on paper through assessments that you might have done where the academic need is. So it's very easy to show a parent that kind of a need. But when the need is something different, when it's a speech and language need, whether it's a behavior need, needs that can't be shown in that kind of way have to be recorded and observed, and I have notes taken about them in a different way. So Lindy has a great link for you over on her blog that's a free printable that you can use to gather that information. Now, she's an expert on this topic, and she's the one who wrote the blog post at Pre-K Pages about this. So I consider her an authority on this topic. So if she wrote that, then I think it's probably going to be very helpful for you. So once you've collected that data, you've taken your notes, you've got your printable, and you've filled it out to the best of your ability, when you have that kind of documentation to back up what you're saying, it's going to be more helpful, whether that's something that you have to bring to your principal, your diagnostician, or the parent. It's still going to be more helpful than just you saying it. To have that extra piece there, first of all, it lets administration and diagnosticians know that this isn't just something you were walking by their office and thought, oh, I need to tell them about this. This is something you have been intentionally thinking about and planning for. So this isn't just some spur of the moment, I'm walking by the diagnostician's office and I'll pop my head in and tell her about this. This is real. Okay, so you're going to want to do that. And yes, so I talked about how the academic stuff is really easy to show, but you're going to want to have something more than that for the other types of things that are not as visible. So one of the things Lindy talks about is all kids have difficult behaviors. So if we're talking about a behavior, for example, a very difficult, extreme behavior, all kids have behaviors. All kids have meltdowns. All kids have tantrums. But the difference is the frequency, the intensity, and the duration of these behaviors. So yes, 3 months or once a week. And then this 3-year-old over here is having a meltdown every 5 minutes. There's a difference. And those meltdowns may last 20 minutes. This meltdown that happened once a month or whatever was also 20 minutes. But these happen very, very frequently and occur almost daily. So it's the frequency, the intensity, and the duration. That's the difference in those behaviors when you're looking at them in the classroom. So you're going to collect that data to track those behaviors, noting the times, because that's what administration and diagnosticians are going to look at. The times. Is it always happening at 8 o'clock? So they might want to say it's separation anxiety. Is it always happening first thing? Maybe the child's hungry or tired. So you're always going to want to be tracking that time as well. Okay, I'm going to check the comments because I see them moving over here. Marcia says the parents do compare their own children. Yes, they'll say things like, my older kid learned the ABCs at 3, but my second child doesn't know them yet, and they're 4. Yes, yes, yes. Behavior issues, this is from Alice. Behavior issues are some of the most difficult to deal with because there's so many variances for why they're happening. That's absolutely true. If you're just joining us, we're talking about having tough conversations with parents. This is a live Facebook broadcast. I'm Vanessa Levin from Pre-K Pages. If this is your first live broadcast, let us know in the comments below and we'll give you a little link to how Facebook Live works. Yes. Patterns. Kimberly says they like to see patterns in behavior. That's what they're looking for. So when you're taking down your data and you're putting the time on there, they're looking for patterns. So that's why it's helpful. Yes. Okay, so there's another link that Lindy gives us in her post. It's a resource you can use for assessing behavior. It's from the Technical Assistance Center on Social Emotional Intervention. I think I gave you that link, Tom, but if I didn't, let them know it's in the blog post as well. Let's see. Oh, she also talks about there is an awesome resource that Lindy gives you. I'm trying to give you as many resources as I can because it's really important that you go out and seek the information, because one thing I found working in the public schools is that nobody ever came to me and said, Vanessa, do you have any concerns about any kids in your class? Well, let me explain. I had to figure all of it out totally on my own. Nobody ever showed me how to do it, and I think that's a travesty. I did not know how to get kids referred. I mean, I knew I had to fill out some papers, but I didn't know the ins and outs of it, like the secrets. It's almost like they keep it a secret, like they don't want us to know. So there's lots of links in this post that can help you. So this next one is from the Behavior Doctor. There are tons of free resources at this link that Lindy gives you in the blog post. There are free printable data collection forms for documenting frequency and duration of behaviors, in addition to the ones Lindy has given you, but there's tons and tons of them there. I was clicking through all the little plus signs on the page, and there's just tons of free resources there for you. So it's almost like if you're a special ed teacher, they give you all this secret information. You know, here's how to refer a child, and and if you're a gen ed teacher, you don't get any of that. So that's at least my experience. That's not the experience of everybody. I'm just generalizing. So you're going to want to plan for the conversation you're going to have with parents. You might want to practice with somebody because these tough conversations, they're the kind of things that you lose sleep over. You lose sleep when you have to have a tough conversation with a parent because you're thinking about the outcome, right? And I was watching this video about tough conversations. Lindy has a link to that in the blog post as well. It's Judy Ringer's Difficult Conversations. And it's not just for teachers, it's for difficult conversations in general, whether it's at the workplace or whatever. But I was watching the video and it was just so true because quite often when we're having a tough conversation, we're thinking about all the different scenarios or outcomes, right? And we're quite often thinking about trying to get our point across. We want to let the other person know that we're having a conversation with what our point is, what we want to get across. And quite often we forget that the other person is going to have an outcome in their mind as well. And so what happens is we start to conflict and we have this defensive thing that starts going on. Like I'm telling the parent something and they want to defend back. It's a natural instinct that we have. And so we can't approach it in that us versus them mentality. We have to go in with the child in mind, the outcome for the child. So it's always going to, it should never be us versus them. It's always going to be about the child and what's best for the child. So it's a real mindset shift, because our natural instinct is to be defensive. Oh, I'm glad you like the links, Gina. Yes, Megan, during the live broadcast, the comments go really, really fast. So Tom will be posting a link to the blog post called Tough Conversations again in just a moment. All right. Wonderful. Thank you, Sharon. I'm glad you like it. All right. Tanya, I have, we did a whole summer book study a few years ago on challenging or difficult behaviors. So there's a whole series of posts over at Pre-K Pages, a book study that we did, many posts about challenging behaviors. So we're not really talking about the solutions for challenging behaviors tonight. We have talked about those before. But go over to Pre-K Pages and search in the search box for challenging behaviors, and there'll be a whole series of posts you can go and read on that. But tonight we're just going to talk about having that conversation with parents. Okay, so the next thing Lindy talks about in her post, and this is really important, and those of you who've taught before for a while know this already, but this will be a reminder for you. And for those of you who are new, or for those of you who are parents, this will be new information for you. So this is the most important thing I'm going to say tonight. Are you ready? Teachers cannot diagnose a child. Okay, we're not allowed to do that. I don't care where you work, whether you're public, private, in-home childcare provider, worker in a childcare center. It doesn't matter what your role is. You cannot diagnose a child, okay? You can't say that the child even has characteristics of a specific disability, okay? So you can't go in and give the parent a diagnosis, so then the parent goes to the doctor and said, the teacher said he's dyslexic. So you can't do that. What you can do, we can state our concerns. We can tell the parent what we notice. We can tell the parent and the administration our concerns that we see, the areas of need that we see, so that families can get help. Okay? So be prepared to give parents the information that they need to take the next steps. So that's often, in my situation working with at-risk populations, most of our parents did not know that that they had free services available to them before their child started school. And so here in this blog post, Lindy gives you links, okay? So under the law in the United States, I don't know how it works in other countries. Sorry, guys. I know there's a lot of you from around the world tonight. But in other countries, I don't know how it works. In the U.S., any child under 9 can receive services under the general developmental disability label, if you want to call it that. Children under the age of 9 can receive special ed services under developmental disabilities. But they must have one of these 13 disabilities that are listed there, and Lindy lists them for you. So what I found working in the public schools was that, I couldn't get a child referred for autism. I couldn't come in to my administration or my diagnostician and say, this child's autistic. Well, first of all, I can't say that. I can't do that. That's not my job. I couldn't even indicate, that this is what I thought. But I could share my concerns, and usually how the child would get in, and this is the secret they don't tell you, is that child would get in with a speech need, because that child didn't speak or couldn't speak well enough. So they would get in under that, and then later on they would go on during the IEPs as the child got older, and then they could go further in their diagnosis at that time. So Lindy lists those 13 areas there, but when it comes to preschoolers, you're going to find that almost most of the time, at least in my experience, is they get in under speech. So if a parent has a concern, so parents, this is for you, and teachers, this is for you to share with your parents. If a parent has a concern about a child that is not school age, that means if the child is younger than, in some areas, younger than 3, in some areas 4, depending on when your school starts. So here in Texas, we have public pre-K for children who qualify. So for 4-year-olds who qualify. So if a parent had a 3-year-old and they had a concern, they could go to the school district, and the school district is obligated to provide services to that child if they meet that need. So the parent can advocate for that. It's totally, that's part of the law, okay? And Lindy explains that here as well. And, you know, if the child doesn't qualify for pre-K, that's okay too, because then the parent could go and still say, my child has a need, and that child might qualify for what we call PPCD here in Texas. Other places call it different things, but it's basically a preschool program for children with special needs. So they have to get in under one of those 13 areas. And children under the age of 9 here in the U.S. can get special ed services under the age of 9 under developmental disability. And that's one of those 13 things Lindy has listed there. A user-friendly explanation of all that stuff I just talked about, the developmental disability in those 13 ways, can be found at understood.org. And there's a link to that in this How to Have Tough Conversations blog post. But one thing you don't want to do, and I do want to bring this up, is you don't want to print this blog post out and give it to parents. Not because I told you not to, but because, again, that would be implying that their child had a special need. So you don't want to be in any way, shape, or form diagnosing a child. You're going to want to share your concerns, your observations, and things you noticed. And so this blog post isn't going to do that for you. So don't print this out and give it to parents. You're going to want to have that tough conversation. That's the hard part, because quite often we want to just give them something and just let it go. Okay, I'm going to check the comments here. Yay, I'm glad you think it's helpful, Jennifer. Thank you. Peru is in the house. We have a great international audience tonight. If you want to let us know how the referral process works in your country, I'd love to hear about it in the comments. Any of you all that are here from other places. Oh yes, Marcia, it's very hard when parents are separated and one is open to the tough conversation and one isn't. That's very difficult. I've been there and done that too. That's the worst, really. Kimberly's getting ready to start her 20th year. Yay, Kimberly! Mary from Billings, Montana. Wonderful. Michelle has a great point, and I agree completely, Michelle. She says parents come in and ask how their child did today, and she always tries to give them the positives first. So that is definitely the way to go. Anytime you have a parent conference, whether it's about a child who has a potential issue or not, you're always going to want to start with the positives. Absolutely. Julie Hall. Yay. Hi, Julie. Yes, Alice, it is very sad that parents don't know their rights. They are completely welcome to go to the school district if they have a concern. If they have a child at home that's not school age, it doesn't matter. There's no need to wait. You can go ahead. Early intervention is key. And there's so many programs out there available to parents that they don't know about. And the thing is a lot of these organizations that are out there, they're great organizations and they provide great services, but they have terrible marketing. So it's kind of, they rely on us to get the word out. Yes, and Kimberly has another good point. They have a birth to 3 program that goes in homes, usually referred by a pediatrician. And that's a good point. I want to talk about that more, Kimberly. Pediatrician is really the key. And if you work with at-risk populations, this is a really big problem and part of the reason why a lot of our kids that we work with don't get the services they need in a timely fashion, because our parents don't see a pediatrician. They only go to the ER. And they see a different doctor every time. They don't go for milestone checkups. They don't have any of those services that are available to most of us. So that is quite often how they fall through the cracks. They're not seeing a pediatrician. They're only going to the ER when they're very, very sick. And quite often, if they're seeing a different doctor every time, the child's not speaking, the doctor's like, well, the child's very sick, the child is scared, the child doesn't know me, and they dismiss it. And so if they don't see the same pediatrician, then we find huge gaps. And so the pediatricians can't refer kids if they're not seeing them. So that's a really big problem here. Yay, Katina. Yes. All right. All right. Terry says things are different in Ohio. Yay. All right. Okay. So moving on. Let's see. Yes, parents are very nervous about giving their 3, 4, or 5-year-old a diagnosis. And quite often they don't understand that this isn't a life sentence. You know, children exit out of IEPs all the time. So it's not going to hurt their child. It's really only there to help. All right. So you're going to want to go through that blog post from Lindy and get all those wonderful resources that she has for you there that you can use. So how do you have that tough conversation? So what would that look like? So we've talked about kind of the whys. Now let's look at that conversation. So this is just one that it's similar to one that I had once. Of course, I'm not going to name any children specifically or anything like that. Any child who has an IEP can never be discussed with anybody else, whether that person is the teacher in the room next to you or another parent. By law, that's private, confidential information. But this is a conversation that I remember, and I try to, every time I have to have a tough conversation, I try to recall the steps that I took in having this conversation. And it looked a little something like this. So I might sit down with the parent after, we've decided to meet. And sometimes that would just be a regularly scheduled conference that we usually have after like the sixth week of school. And I might start, of course, with the positives. I'm noticing that Thomas really enjoys coming to school every day. He has several friends in the class. Does he talk about his friends at home with you? And so we're just kind of easing into conversation. It's very casual. It's not boom right away in their face. So we're going to want to ease into conversation, make it more of a conversation than a talking to. So I'm going to ask them if their child talks about school, if they talk about their friends, and if you were to be approaching a concern with speech, this might be a good information for you to have, because if they're saying, oh, yes, he talks about them all the time. And, so you're saying, oh, maybe he talks more at home than he does at school. You're thinking in your head, right? So after you've had some conversation like that, you might say another thing like, oh, and he really loves some of our songs. Has he shared his favorite song with you yet? And they might say, oh, yes, he talks about the sun all the time. What is that song about the sun? And you might say, oh, yes, we sing that every morning. That's his favorite. I'm so glad he talks about it. So you're sharing these positive experiences that their child has. And now when you're getting ready to approach the topic, jump at it. Then you might say, well, we're here today to talk about Thomas's progress, and I'm meeting with a lot of parents, and we're talking about the progress, and here are some things that I've gathered that I thought you might like to look at. And so you're going to have some kind of portfolio there. That would be more the academic side of things. But then you can start, once you kind of started looking at that a little bit and explaining kind of what it is you're doing in school, then you might say, and I've noticed that Thomas doesn't talk to his friends as much, something like that. I've noticed. Use I notice. And then at the end of that statement, whatever that is, say, have you noticed that at home too? Let them talk. You shouldn't be the one doing all the talking. A conversation is a two-way street. So let them talk. You just told them something that you noticed. Don't say it's a huge concern and that I think he's, got a speech delay or, whatever it is. Just say I noticed and then let them talk. And you're going to get a lot of useful information when you do that. It's really going to help you better understand and maybe put some of your fears to rest. And then you might come with another one and after you've talked for a little bit. And say, I've noticed, and then whatever it is about Thomas that you've noticed. Have you noticed this before too at home? And let them talk. So don't do that for too long or they're going to start to get concerned. You don't have a hidden agenda here. You really are just trying to have an open conversation and you're building a relationship. That's the most important thing. You can't have a conversation with somebody, a real, true, honest conversation with a give and take, unless that person trusts you and you've built some kind of a relationship. So until you've built that relationship, and there is a blog post at Pre-K Pages about that too, making connections with families. I also have a free webinar called The Secret Art of Parent Communication that you can watch. Tom will drop a link to that too. If it moves too fast for you, you can go over to Pre-K Pages and type in Secret Art of Communication, of Parent Communication in the search box, and it will come up and you can watch that free webinar there. But you really have to build that trust first, because if the parent hasn't had any interaction with you and you have that meeting, it doesn't matter how friendly you are and how conversational it is, when that conversation turns to the you noticed part, there could be some resistance. You're going to want to build that relationship up front. You're going to want to have as many positive interactions with that parent or those parents in advance as you can. So that's how you're going to have that conversation. So at the end of the conversation that you're having with the parents, because you're not going to talk for an hour or forever, but you can say something like, so today we've talked about Thomas's progress, and I've heard some really great things about Thomas's experiences and how he feels about those, and how, and kind of recap the conversation for them. You're going to want to recap that. And then you say, and we talked a little bit about some of the things I noticed at school, and maybe give an example and say, I noticed, and then we talked about some of the things that you've noticed at home and maybe give an example. And so I think our next step should be to process all this and maybe come back together in a few weeks. Let's think about ways that we can work together to help Thomas blank, whatever it is that he needs to be working on or that you've noticed you have a concern about. So you might say something, you probably have something in mind that you want to do. So I'm going to really work on getting Thomas to enunciate, his name and maybe introduce himself to his friends or talk in some way, whatever that is that you have for that particular child. I'm going to try and get him to do that at school. And maybe you can work on talking with him at home as well and asking him to do the same with his siblings or neighbors or whatever. So you have a plan in place and, that you're kind of giving to them, letting them know that you have thought about this. This isn't something just off the cuff. And then you can tell them that you want to meet with them again in whatever number of weeks it is so that you can kind of talk about how that plan worked. So it is a lot of work to refer a child. It is a lot of work to even bring up the topic. It's huge. It is extremely huge. And so often we feel so burdened as teachers, not burdened, maybe that's not the right word. We feel such a sense of responsibility because we feel like if we don't get that child the help he or she needs by the end of the year the child is with us, that we have failed in some way. And what I want you to go away from this broadcast tonight with is that you shouldn't feel like a failure. You have to work within a system and you have to follow the rules and the regulations, which are many, and many of those work against you and work against the child. So don't feel like a failure if you can't get a referral in a year, because just by planting the seed and starting those conversations and having a relationship with that parent, you have started the process. So even if you can't accomplish your goal, you have started the process. You've made people aware, and you're basically paving the way. So what I would see happening in my school was that I would do all of this hard work in pre-K trying to get help for the child. Even when all of us were on board, the school and myself, the parents, we were all on board, it still sometimes couldn't happen because of all the red tape. So then the child would go to kindergarten and immediately get services because I had already done all the hard work. So, and I'm not tooting my own horn. I'm just saying that I did a lot of the hard work and then they got the services in kindergarten. That still is a success. That's a success because now that child is getting the help. It's all about the kids. I'm going to check some of the comments here. Hey, Josie, it's okay. You can watch from the beginning in just a minute. Hey, Kaylee and Kelsey are here. Oh, we are talking about tough conversations with parents tonight. So nothing fun tonight, Kelsey. Sorry. Yes, Lori says she always responds to parents who ask what's wrong with my child to talk to their pediatrician because I'm not a doctor. That's right, Lori. Lots of parents use free immunizations. They attend those scheduled shot days to give out information. That's great, Kimberly. You are a great wealth of information. Yes. Julie from Northern Ireland. Yes, asking parents their opinion and actively listening to their responses is a must. I like what Julie said about active listening because quite often when it's the parents' turn to talk and we've just said, I noticed, what do you notice? We shut down and we're thinking about the next thing we're going to say. You can't do that. You have to actively listen because there might be something that they say in there that's going to be really important. Yes, you have to know and be prepared to know all the resources available in the community. I agree, Margaret. I totally agree with that. I just think it's a shame that nobody comes to us. Now, some of you may have this luxury, I don't know, but nobody ever came to me and said, here are all the resources you can use to help get your kids services. It was like they didn't want my kids to have services. All right. Thank you, Laura. All right. What do you do when you feel the parent is not being honest? Well, I'll tell you this, Christine. I've been in that situation before, and that means the parent is not ready. And there's nothing you can do when a parent's not ready. Here's the way I look at it. If the parent isn't ready and they're not having that two-way conversation with you, they will eventually have that conversation with somebody, whether it's you or not. We can't always win. As teachers, we will always want to teach and we always want to be right, but we can't always win. So if there's a parent like that, at least you've planted the seed, because this conversation, it will happen eventually. They can delay the conversation, but it will happen. So just know that you've planted the seed. If the parent hears it in pre-K and then in K and then in first grade, then maybe by second grade, they'll be ready to accept it. All right. Catherine, if you look in the blog post under the, right underneath where it says Individuals with Disabilities Act, IDEA, that's a federal thing here in the U.S., right under that it talks about the developmental disability and the 13 things that she lists. So in the blog post that Tom linked there, it's called How to Have Tough Conversations with Parents. There you go. Catherine's got it. After how long should we do a follow-up with the parents, asks Marcia. I think that's going to be up to you. I would probably give it at least 4 weeks, depending on when the holidays fall and things like that. Just because anytime we see any kind of a change in a child, it's going to take a while for that change to show up. So 4 or more weeks, probably. I know that seems like an eternity, but if you want to see a change, if you're looking for a change, you have to give time. You have to allow time for that change to take place. Does that make sense? Let's see. Thank you, Gina. It is the hardest part of teaching. It's the one I lost the most sleep about. And I certainly did not win all of my efforts were not always won. There were parents that were not always accepting, and there were parents that weren't ready to hear it. And then there were parents who were just like, oh, and they really got it and they were on board. So, yes, that's right, Lisa. I know. That's what I was saying without saying it. Okay, so what else? So you're going to want to check out that how to step-by-step checklist for having difficult conversations by Judy Ringer. And if you print it, just know it's like 15 pages. It's really cool though. It's wonderful. It's a step-by-step thing for having a difficult conversation with anybody. It could be your principal, a coworker, a parent. She's got worksheets and stuff to go with it. It's all free. It's really cool. Lots of great information in that blog post from Lindy. So those are my tips for having tough conversations with parents. I want to remind you that Dr. Jean will be here Wednesday night. Our topic is finger plays, the why behind the what. So if you just tune in right where you are now, Wednesday night at 8 p.m. Eastern, Dr. Jean and I will be here. And also my next public webinar has been titled, it hasn't been given a date yet, but you're going to want to subscribe to my free email updates so you can get a notification when registration is ready. And that topic of that next public webinar is Ready, Set, Read. What comes first? So you're going to want to sign up for my emails so you can be notified when registration is open for the next webinar. And if you haven't seen one of my webinars before, Tom will drop a link to where you can find them all. I've had 4 of them so far, and you can look at all of them there at the link if you're interested. And we also want to thank all of the Teaching Tribe members that are here with us tonight. So many of you have shown up. The Teaching Tribe is the only online community for pre-K and kindergarten teachers. We are exclusive to that age group, and we have a membership vault of all the printable resources from pre-K pages available at your fingertips 24/7, 2 webinars a month with 2 certificates of attendance for 1 hour each, a supportive community of new and veteran teachers alike, a safe haven for asking and answering questions. So you're going to want to check it out. We also have a book study going on. We're going to have another book study this winter. And all the Teaching Tribe members have already seen the Dr. Jean webinar. So they are privileged to have all of those things first. They're going to see the Ready, Set, Read webinar on August 25th. And we also have some very special guest experts coming up on our broadcasts over in the Teaching Tribe. And they're going to be secret for now, but I have several of them. Okay, you just convinced me. I'll tell you one. Jonalee Zupanik from Minds on Math will be discussing, she's a national math expert. She'll be discussing best practices in early childhood math with us. So I just gave you one, and I will let you know one of the others coming up. All right, thanks a lot for watching, guys. I want to appreciate you taking the time for stopping by. I will be back Wednesday night with Dr. Jean. Don't forget, I'm Vanessa Levin from Pre-K Pages, signing off for now. Have a good night. Bye.